The man behind the glass walls, Cameron. Brooks stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown Seattle penthouse office. Watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over Puget Sound, his reflection stared back at him, a tall man with sandy brown, his hair showing premints of gray at 38, wearing an expensive navy suit that hung perfectly on his athletic frame. But the eyes that met his own in the glass were cold, distant. Protected by invisible walls he had built 3 years ago, his phone buzzed with the 7th reminder of the day. Another nanny agency, another interview. Another person who would probably last 3 months before giving up on his complicated household. Cameron sighed deeply and pressed the intercom button. "Send her up," he said flatly. A different kind of candidate, Grace Adler. Checked her watch as the private elevator climbed toward the top floor. She was exactly on time, which mattered to her. The 32-year-old woman smoothed down her simple emerald dress and took a deep breath. She had left her position as a child psychologist in Portland 6 months ago after her clinic closed due to funding issues. Now, she needed work, and this opportunity, though unconventional, felt right somehow. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling apartment. It looked more like an art gallery than a home. Everything was pristine, modern, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. Grace is trained. I immediately noticed what was missing. No toys scattered around. No colorful drawings on the refrigerator. No signs that a child actually lived here, Miss Adler. Cameron appeared from a hallway, his handshake firm and brief. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Grace settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. She studied Cameron carefully. Handsome, yes, but there was something deeply sad behind those guarded hazel eyes. She had seen that look before in her practice, the look of someone who had stopped letting himself feel anything. "The interview that became something more. Your resume is impressive," Cameron began, scanning the papers in front of him. Child psychology degree, 8 years working with trauma cases, specialization in grief counseling. Looked up sharply. Why leave that career for nanny work? Grace appreciated the directness, because sometimes children need more than an hour a week in a therapy office. They need someone present in their daily lives who understands what they're going through. Your daughter has been through something traumatic. I want to help. Cameron's jaw tightened slightly. What did the agency tell you about my daughter? That her name is Lily, she's 7, and she lost her mother 3 years ago. That she's had 6 nannies in 18 months? That she's withdrawn, has difficulty connecting with people, and barely speaks at school. Grace leaned forward slightly. But what they didn't tell me is what you think she needs. The question seemed to catch Cameron off guard. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming once on the armrest before he caught himself and stopped. I think she needs someone who won't leave. Someone who won't promise to stay and then disappear like everyone else has. I can't promise I'll never leave, Grace said honestly. Life is unpredictable. But I can promise that if I commit to this, I'll give everything I have to helping Lily heal. And I can promise I'll never leave without saying a proper goodbye. Something shifted in Cameron's expression, just for a second, before the mask returned. The agency mentioned you have no family obligations. Is that accurate? I'm unmarried, no children, and my parents retired to Arizona last year. This job would be my complete focus. The position requires living here during the week. Lily has frequent nightmares and needs someone available. Cameron's voice was matter-of-fact, but Grace heard the exhaustion underneath. The salary is $70,000 a year, full benefits, your own suite with private bathroom. Weekends off unless there's an emergency. Grace nodded slowly. Before I accept, I need to meet Lily, and I need to ask you something personal. Cameron's eyebrows raised slightly. Nobody usually dared to ask him personal questions. Do you want help too? Grace asked softly. Because healing a child who's lost a parent often means healing the parent who's still here. The girl who spoke in whispers. The door to Lily's room was decorated with a small nameplate shaped like a butterfly, the only splash of whimsy Grace had seen in the entire apartment. Cameron knocked gently before opening it. Lily, this is Miss Grace. She might be coming to stay with us. The girl sitting on the floor, surrounded by books, looked up with eyes that were too old for 7. She had her father's hazel eyes, but her hair was dark and curly, pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a purple dress that looked uncomfortable and shoes that were far too formal for a Saturday afternoon at home. "Hi, Lily," Grace said, staying by the door. She knew better than to crowd a traumatized child. "I love your butterfly. Did you pick it out yourself?" Lily shook her head and looked back down at her book. Grace noticed the title, A Collection of Fairy Tales. "Is that your favorite book?" A tiny nod. "Mine too, when I was your age. I especially loved the story about the princess who saved herself instead of waiting for a prince. Do you know that one?" Lily looked up again, this time with a flicker of interest. "The Paper Bag Princess," she whispered. Grace's heart jumped. The child had spoken. Yes, that's the one. The dragon burned all her clothes, but she was so clever she saved the prince anyway, and then realized he was too mean and left him behind. "She didn't need him," Lily said, slightly louder. "She was brave by herself." She was, Grace agreed, slowly moving to sit on the floor a few feet away from Lily, not too close. "Sometimes the bravest thing is being yourself even when things are hard." Lily studied Grace carefully, her small face serious. "Are you going to leave like the others?" The question hung in the air. Grace saw Cameron stiffen in the doorway, waiting for her response. "Lily, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that if I come here, it will be because I want to be your friend. And friends try their best to stick together, especially during hard times. Would you like to have me as your friend?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, holding her book tightly. Then she said something that broke Grace's heart. "My mommy was my friend. She used to read to me every night. She sounds like she was wonderful," Grace said gently. "Would you like to tell me about her sometime?" Lily looked shocked, then hopeful. "Really? The other ladies said I shouldn't talk about Mommy because it made Daddy sad." Grace glanced at Cameron and saw pain flash across his face. "Your mommy was an important person in your life. You should always be allowed to talk about people you love. And sometimes talking about people who are gone helps keep them close to our hearts." Lily stood up slowly and walked toward Grace, stopping just inches away. "Can you start today?" The dinner that changed everything. Grace accepted the position that afternoon. By evening, she had moved her essentials into the guest suite, a beautiful room with a view of the city skyline. She was unpacking when Cameron knocked on her open door. "Lily asked if you would join us for dinner," he said, and there was something different in his voice. Less guarded. "We usually eat separately. She has a meal in her room. I eat at my desk while working. But she insisted we all eat together tonight." At the table, Grace turned to face him. "And how do you feel about that?" Cameron ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. Honestly, terrified. "We haven't had a family dinner since Jennifer died. I don't know if I remember how to do this, and we'll figure it out together," Grace said simply. "One meal at a time." The dining room table was enormous, designed to seat 12, but the 3 of them clustered at one end. Lily had insisted on setting the places herself, putting Grace between her and her father. The housekeeper had prepared pasta, and Lily carefully served everyone, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "This looks delicious, Lily," Grace said warmly. "Thank you for setting such a beautiful table." Lily beamed, and Grace saw Cameron watching his daughter with an expression of wonder, as if seeing her truly smile was a rare and precious gift. "Kitty," Lily said suddenly, "can I tell Grace about Mommy's garden?" Cameron froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Grace could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at his daughter. "Yes," he said quietly. "Tell Grace about the garden." And as Lily began to talk, her words tumbling out faster and faster, describing the roses her mother had loved and the butterfly garden they had planted together, Grace watched Cameron. She saw tears he was fighting to hold back, saw his hands grip the edge of the table, saw the dam he had built around his grief beginning to crack. When Lily paused for breath, Cameron spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother loved that garden," she said. Watching things grow gave her hope. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Can we fix it, Daddy?" It's all messy now. Grace, will you help us? Grace looked at Cameron, asking silent permission. He nodded almost imperceptibly. I would love to help you both bring that garden back to life, Grace said. Maybe we could start this weekend. As dinner continued, with Lily chattering away and Cameron gradually relaxing enough to share a few memories of his own, Grace felt something shift in the cold apartment. It was small, fragile, barely there. But it was something that had been missing for 3 years. It was the beginning of hope, and neither Cameron nor Grace realized yet just how much this moment would change all of their lives. The night. When walls finally cracked, Grace woke to the sound of muffled crying echoing through the hallway. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed to 17 a.m. in harsh red numbers. She grabbed her robe and hurried toward Lily's room, her heart racing with concern. But when she reached the doorway, she stopped short. Cameron was already there, sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, holding his daughter as she sobbed into his chest. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated them both. Grace could see that Cameron's face was wet with tears, too. The car was spinning, Daddy, Lily cried. I saw it spinning, and Mommy was trying to reach for me, but she couldn't, and there was so much glass everywhere. Grace's breath caught. Lily had been in the car during the accident that killed her mother. The file from the agency hadn't mentioned that detail, and suddenly so much about this child's trauma made terrible sense. Cameron held his daughter tighter, rocking her gently. You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe. I'm here. I'm right here. But you're always leaving too, Lily whimpered. You're always at work. And what if something happens to you too? The words hit Cameron like a physical blow. Grace could see him struggling with the weight of them. Guilt, the fear, the overwhelming responsibility of being the only parent left. Grace knocked softly on the doorframe. May I come in? Cameron looked up, and in the darkness, with his defenses stripped away by his daughter's pain and his own, he simply nodded. Grace sat on the other side of the bed and gently placed a hand on Lily's back. Lily, sweetheart, can you tell me about the dream? Through hiccuping sobs, Lily described the nightmare. It was a memory, Grace realized, twisted by a child's processing of trauma. The car accident had happened during a rainstorm. Jennifer had been driving Lily home from a dance class when a truck ran a red light. Jennifer died at the scene. Lily had been physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. Lily, listen to me, Grace said softly. What happened to your mommy was a terrible accident. But accidents are exactly that. Random things that we can't predict or control. Your daddy isn't going to leave you, but he's gone all the time, Lily said, looking at her father with such raw need that Grace felt tears spring to her own eyes. He leaves before I wake up and comes home when I'm sleeping. What if I forget what he looks like? Cameron made a sound like he'd been punched. He pulled Lily onto his lap, cradling her like she was a baby again. Oh, Lily, my beautiful girl. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Grace watched as this man who had built an empire, commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without flinching, completely broke down in front of her. His shoulders shook as he cried, finally releasing years of buried grief. I miss her too, Cameron whispered into Lily's hair. Every single day, I miss your mommy so much. And I've been working so much because when I work, I don't have to think about how empty this house feels without her. But that was wrong. That was so wrong of me because you needed me here. The promise made at dawn. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, the three of them on Lily's bed. Grace held them both, offering the comfort of presence, not trying to fix anything, just being there. Eventually, Lily's sobs quieted, and she fell asleep in her father's arms. Exhausted by the emotional release, Cameron carefully tucked Lily back under her covers, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness. Then he and Grace quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open in the hallway. Cameron leaned against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. Grace sat beside him, close but not touching, giving him space to process. I've been a terrible father, Cameron said, his voice hollow. No, Grace said firmly. You've been a grieving husband trying to survive. But Lily is grieving too, and she needs you to survive together, not separately. Cameron looked at her, and in the dim hallway light, Grace could see the raw vulnerability in his expression. I don't know how to do this without Jennifer. She was the heart of our family. I was always the one working, providing, planning for the future. She was the one who made everything feel like home. When she died, the home died too. I don't know how to bring it back. Grace reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, but profound. The first real physical contact between them beyond professional handshakes. You don't bring it back, Cameron. You can't recreate what was, but you can create something new. A different kind of home, one that honors Jennifer's memory, but also makes space for life to continue. Cameron squeezed her hand, and they sat in silence for several minutes. Then he said, "Tell me about losing your father. You mentioned it that first day with Lily." Grace was surprised he remembered. I was 8. He had a heart attack while coaching my soccer game. One minute he was cheering for me, the next he was on the ground. My mother tried to shield me from it, made everyone pretend like we should just move on and be strong. But I needed to grieve. I needed to talk about him, remember him, cry about him. When I wasn't allowed to, the grief festered into anxiety and fear. Is that why you became a psychologist? Yes. I wanted to help other children process loss in healthier ways than I did. And I wanted to help parents understand that protecting children from grief doesn't work. Children are remarkably resilient when given the tools and support to process their emotions. Cameron was quiet, absorbing this. Then he asked, "What happened to your anxiety?" Therapy, time, and eventually allowing myself to fully feel everything I'd been suppressing. The grief, the anger, the fear. Once I stopped running from those feelings, they lost their power over me. Cameron nodded slowly. I've been running for 3 years, I know. I'm tired of running. Grace smiled softly. Then stop. The tradition they rebuilt together the next morning, Cameron did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called his office and told them he wouldn't be coming in. Then he made pancakes with Lily, getting flour everywhere and burning the first batch so badly that the smoke alarm went off. Lily laughed so hard she got hiccups, and the sound filled the apartment with a joy it hadn't known in years. Grace watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart full. This was what healing looked like, messy and imperfect and beautiful. After breakfast, the 3 of them went out to the neglected rooftop garden that had once been Jennifer's pride. It was overgrown and wild, but underneath the weeds, Grace could see the bones of something beautiful. Rose bushes that needed pruning, a butterfly garden choked with grass, a small fountain that no longer worked. "Mommy planted this rose for my 5th birthday," Lily said, pointing to a struggling bush with a few determined blooms. "It's called Lily's blush because the roses are pink like when I get embarrassed." Cameron knelt beside the rose bush, gently touching one of the flowers. "I remember the day we planted this. You were so excited, and your mother spent an hour explaining how to care for roses. She said they need patience and attention, just like little girls. Can we make the garden pretty again?" Lily asked hopefully.
"Yes," Cameron said with certainty.
"We're going to bring it all back. Grace, will you help us?" "I have to confess, I don't know a petunia from a daisy." Grace laughed. "I'd be honored. My grandmother was a master gardener. She taught me everything she knew." They spent the entire day working in the garden. Cameron took off his expensive watch and rolled up his sleeves. He's getting dirt under his fingernails for the first time in years. Lily planted new flowers, carefully patting the soil around each one. Grace taught them about companion planting and how to tell weeds from wildflowers as the sun began to set. Painting the Seattle sky in shades of orange and purple, the 3 of them sat on a garden bench, surveying their work. They were sweaty, dirty, and exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the physical work they'd done. "Thank you," Cameron said quietly to Grace while Lily chased a butterfly. "For last night, for today, for seeing what we needed even when I couldn't." Grace met his eyes. "You're doing the hard work, Cameron. I'm just here to support you both. It's more than that," Cameron said. "You're giving us permission to feel again, to live again. That's not a small thing." The event that changed his priorities, Monday morning, arrived too quickly. Cameron had taken the weekend off, but now duty called. He was scheduled for back-to-back meetings starting at 7 a.m., but before he left, he did something new. He went into Lily's room, woke her gently, and had breakfast with her. It made him 30 minutes late to his first meeting, and he found he didn't care at all. The week progressed with Cameron trying to maintain this new balance. But his company was in the middle of crucial negotiations for a major acquisition. His phone rang constantly. Emergency meetings were scheduled. His business partner, Nathan Wheeler, kept pressing him about investor calls and strategy sessions. By Thursday, Cameron had missed dinner with Lily 3 times. Grace could see the old patterns reasserting themselves, the walls rebuilding, but she also saw how much it was costing him. He looked exhausted, conflicted, torn between 2 worlds. Friday afternoon, Grace received a call from Lily's school. There was a parent-student art show that evening at 6, and Lily had created something special. The teacher thought it was important for Cameron to see it. When Grace told Cameron about the art show, she watched the internal struggle play out on his face. "I have a dinner meeting with the acquisition team at 6:30. It's been scheduled for weeks. The investors are flying in from Tokyo, specifically for this. What do you think Jennifer would want you to do?" Grace asked quietly. The question stopped Cameron cold. He stared at Grace for a long moment, then picked up his phone and called Nathan. "Move the dinner to 8, Cameron said. "No, I'm not asking. I'm telling you. My daughter has an art show, and I'm going to be there. The investors can wait 2 hours, or they can walk away from the deal. Family comes first." When he hung up, his hands were shaking slightly. "That might have just cost me $100 million acquisition, or it might have just saved something worth far more than that," Grace said. The picture that revealed everything, though. Elementary school gym was decorated with children's artwork hung on every available wall. Lily was thrilled to see her father walk in, and she dragged him and Grace immediately to her display. "This is my special project," Lily announced proudly. "We had to draw our family." Cameron looked at the large poster board and his breath caught. Lily had drawn 3 figures in bright crayon. One was clearly labeled me with her characteristic dark curls. Another was labeled Daddy with sandy hair and a tie. And the third, standing between them holding both their hands, was labeled Grace, who teaches us how to be a family again. Tears welled in Cameron's eyes. He knelt down to Lily's level. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. But why did you put Grace in your family picture?" Lily looked confused by the question. "Because she is family, Daddy. She loves us, and we love her. That's what makes a family, right? Mommy used to say family is the people who love you no matter what." Cameron looked up at Grace, and the expression on his face was complicated, a mixture of gratitude, fear, hope, and something deeper that made Grace's heart race. Grace knelt beside them, emotions swirling. "Lily, I do love you both very much. You've both become incredibly special to me." The teacher came over to admire the artwork. And as she chatted with Lily about her creative process, Cameron stood and gently pulled Grace aside. "Grace, we need to talk," he said softly. "About what's happening here, about what I'm feeling, and what I think you might be feeling too." Before Grace could respond, Cameron's phone rang. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. Cameron glanced at it, then deliberately powered off the phone without answering. "Whatever he wants can wait," Cameron said. "Some conversations are more important than business deals." The rainstorm confession, the art show ended at 7:30. And Cameron texted Nathan that he wouldn't make the investor dinner at all. It was a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in 3 years, he was choosing his personal life over business without guilt or hesitation. After putting Lily to bed, Cameron found Grace in the living room, staring out at the city lights. Rain had begun falling, gentle at first, then building into a steady downpour that streaked the windows with silver rivulets. "Grace," Cameron said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Can we have that conversation now?" She turned to face him, and Cameron could see the same mixture of hope and apprehension in her eyes that he felt in his own chest. "I think we need to—" They sat on the couch, and for a moment neither spoke. The rain provided a rhythm to the silence, a gentle percussion that somehow made the moment feel safer, more intimate. "When Jennifer died," Cameron began, his voice low and careful. "I thought I'd never feel anything again. I built walls so high that nothing could reach me. I threw myself into work because work was safe. Numbers didn't make you feel. Contracts didn't break your heart. Success didn't abandon you. Grace listened intently, giving him space to find his words. And then you walked into our lives, Cameron continued, and suddenly those walls started crumbling. Watching you with Lily, seeing how you made her laugh again, how you gave her permission to grieve and to heal, it did something to me. It made me realize I'd been existing, not living. Cameron Grace started, but he gently raised a hand. Please, let me finish, before I lose my courage. He took a deep breath. Grace, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. And that terrifies me, because I don't know if I'm ready. If it's too soon, if I'm being fair to Jennifer's memory, or to you, or even to myself. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Cameron nodded. 5 years ago, I was engaged, Grace said, her voice catching slightly. His name was Daniel. We were planning our wedding, talking about starting a family. 2 months before the wedding, he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. He died 6 weeks later. Cameron's expression shifted to one of deep compassion. Grace, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I don't talk about it much, Grace continued. After Daniel died, I threw myself into my work with grieving children. I understood their pain because I was living it myself, but I also built walls, Cameron. I told myself I'd never risk loving someone again because the pain of loss was too unbearable. What changed? Cameron asked softly. Grace looked at him directly, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You and Lily changed everything. You reminded me that love isn't about guarantees or safety. It's about choosing to open your heart even when you know it can break. It's about believing that the joy of connection is worth the risk of pain. Cameron reached out and took her hand, the same gesture she'd offered him in the hallway that night. So where does that leave us? Scared, Grace admitted with a small laugh. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means we're brave enough to try something real. The business that almost broke him the next morning. Cameron woke to 17 missed calls from Nathan and an urgent email from his board of directors. The Japanese investors had walked away from the acquisition deal, offended by Cameron's absence at the dinner. The potential loss to the company was substantial. Cameron sat in his home office, staring at the angry emails and text messages. This was exactly what he'd feared, the cost of choosing personal life over business. His company had been his purpose for so long that letting it falter felt like failing at his very identity. Grace knocked on the door, carrying coffee. She'd seen the stress on his face at breakfast and knew something serious was happening. The deal fell through, Cameron said without preamble. I've probably cost the company millions, maybe more. Nathan is livid. The board wants an emergency meeting. Grace set down the coffee and sat across from him. Do you regret going to Lily's art show? Cameron looked up at her, and despite the stress lines around his eyes, his answer was immediate and certain. No, not for a second. Then you have your answer about what matters most. But I have responsibilities, Grace. Employees depending on me, shareholders, investors. I can't just ignore all of that. I'm not suggesting you ignore it, Grace said calmly. I'm suggesting you redefine it. What if there's a way to be successful in business while also being present for your daughter? What if the problem isn't the business itself, but how you've been approaching it? Cameron leaned back in his chair, considering her words. You sound like you have something specific in mind. What if you promoted Nathan to CEO? What if you moved into more of a chairman role, focusing on strategy and vision but delegating the day-to-day operations? You'd still be involved, still guiding the company, but you wouldn't be consumed by it. The idea was so simple, yet so radical. Cameron had always believed he had to control everything personally, that delegation was weakness. But Grace was right. He'd built an incredible team. Why not trust them to run the company he'd created? I'd have to convince the board, Cameron said slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Nathan would need to prove himself. There would be restructuring new systems. But it's possible, Grace said. If you're willing to let go of the need to control everything. Cameron stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd helped build with his construction projects. Letting go has never been my strength. No, Grace agreed, coming to stand beside him. But learning new strengths is how we grow. The hospital visit that changed perspectives that afternoon. While Cameron was in an emergency board meeting, Grace took Lily to visit a children's hospital where Grace had volunteered before moving to Seattle. She'd promised to read stories to some of the patients, and Lily had been excited to come along in the pediatric wing. Lily met children fighting cancer, children who'd lost limbs in accidents, children who smiled despite unimaginable challenges. One girl, about Lily's age, named Ruby, had lost both parents in a house fire and was being raised by her elderly grandmother while recovering from severe burns. "You're lucky to have a daddy," Ruby told Lily matter-of-factly. "Hold on to him tight." The words struck Lily deeply. On the drive home, she was unusually quiet, processing what she'd seen and heard. "Grace," Lily said finally, "I think I've been selfish." Grace glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I've been mad at Daddy for working so much. But those kids at the hospital, they don't have parents at all. At least I have my daddy, even if he's busy sometimes." Ruby would give anything to have her parents back, even if they worked all the time. Grace pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at Lily properly. "That's a very mature observation, Lily. But you know what? It's okay to want more time with your dad. Ruby's situation doesn't make your feelings less valid. But Daddy works to take care of us, right? To make sure we have a nice home and food and everything we need?" "Yes, he does. And maybe I should tell him it's okay. That I understand he has to work sometimes. I don't want him to feel bad anymore." Grace's heart swelled with love for this compassionate child. "I think your daddy would love to hear that. But I also think he's learning that balance is important. He can take care of you financially and be present for you emotionally. It doesn't have to be one or the other." When they arrived home, Cameron was there, looking exhausted but somehow lighter. The board meeting had gone better than expected. Lily ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "I love you so much. And I'm sorry if I made you feel bad about working. Grace took me to the hospital today, and I met kids who don't have parents. And it made me realize how lucky I am to have you, even when you're busy." Cameron looked over Lily's head at Grace, questions in his eyes. Grace mouthed later and smiled.
"Oh, Lily,"
Cameron said, kneeling to hold his daughter properly. "You never made me feel bad. You helped me see what I was missing. And I have news. I'm making some big changes at work so I can be home more. A lot more." The garden party proposal 3 months later, the rooftop garden was in full bloom. The roses Jennifer had planted years ago were thriving. The butterfly garden attracted monarchs and swallowtails daily, and the fountain had been repaired and gurgled peacefully in the corner. Cameron had successfully transitioned to chairman of his company. With Nathan as CEO, the business was thriving, perhaps even more so with fresh leadership in the daily operations. And Cameron was home for dinner every single night, attended every school event, and had even started coaching Lily's soccer team. Grace was officially no longer the nanny. Cameron had insisted she didn't need a job title to be part of their family, but she'd started a consulting practice, helping other families navigate grief and loss. Working from home and setting her own hours, on a perfect Saturday afternoon, Cameron organized a garden party. He'd invited Grace's mother from Arizona, Nathan and his wife, some of Lily's school friends, and a few close family members. Everyone assumed it was just a celebration of the garden's restoration, but Cameron had a different plan. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the blooming flowers, Cameron gathered everyone around the fountain. Lily stood beside him, bouncing with barely contained excitement. "Thank you all for coming," Cameron began, his voice carrying across the garden. 3 months ago, this garden was dead. It had been neglected for 3 years, just like my heart had been. I'd convinced myself that the best way to honor my late wife Jennifer's memory was to freeze everything in time, to stop living so I wouldn't have to risk feeling pain again. He paused, looking at Grace, who stood with the other guests, confusion and hope mixing on her face. But then Grace came into our lives and taught Lily and me that honoring someone we love doesn't mean stopping our own lives. It means living fully, loving deeply, and choosing joy even when we're scared. Cameron took Lily's hand and walked toward Grace. Grace, you came here as a nanny, but you became so much more. You became Lily's confidant, my partner, our family's heart. You taught us how to grieve, how to heal, and most importantly, how to love again. He knelt on one knee, and Grace gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. I know this might seem fast to some people, Cameron continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. But when you've lost everything once, you learn not to waste time when something precious comes into your life. Grace Adler, would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife and officially becoming Lily's mother? Lily pulled out her own small box and opened it, revealing a delicate necklace with a butterfly charm. And will you be my mommy? Because you already are in my heart. Tears streamed down Grace's face. She looked at Cameron, at Lily, at the garden that had been brought back to life through love and care and patience. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, to both of you. Nothing in the world would make me happier. As Cameron slipped the ring onto her finger and Lily fastened the necklace around her neck, the garden erupted in cheers and applause. But the three of them were in their own world, holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. 6 months later, the family they chose to become the wedding was small and intimate. Held in the rooftop garden, surrounded by Jennifer's roses and the new flowers they'd planted together. Grace wore a simple ivory dress, and Lily was the flower girl in a purple dress she'd picked out herself before the ceremony began. Cameron took a moment alone in the garden with a photo of Jennifer. Thank you, he whispered to her image. Thank you for teaching me how to love. Thank you for giving me Lily, and thank you for sending Grace to us when we needed her most. I'll never forget you, Jennifer. You'll always be part of our story. He placed a single rose at the base of the Lily's blush rose bush, a tradition he'd continue every year. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter and tears and promises. When the officiants asked if anyone had any objections, Lily called out, I object to waiting any longer. Can they kiss now? Everyone laughed, and the officiant obliged, pronouncing them married ahead of schedule. At the reception, Nathan gave a toast. I've known Cameron for 15 years. I've seen him build an empire, face impossible challenges, and overcome every obstacle in his path. But I've never seen him as happy as he is today. Grace, you didn't just become his wife. You've saved his life. Grace's mother spoke next, tears in her eyes. After my daughter lost Daniel, I worried she'd never open her heart again. Cameron, Lily, thank you for showing her that love is always worth the risk. As the evening drew to a close, the three of them stood at the edge of the garden, looking out at the city lights. Are you happy, Daddy? Lily asked, leaning against him. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again, Cameron answered honestly. Are you happy, Grace? Lily turned to her new mother. Grace wrapped an arm around Lily and reached for Cameron's hand. I'm home, and that's the happiest feeling in the world. They stood there together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by courage, by the willingness to risk their hearts again. The garden around them bloomed with life. It's a perfect metaphor for what they'd become, something beautiful that had grown from loss. Nurtured by patience and sustained by love in the distance. A butterfly landed on the lily's blush rose, its wings catching the last rays of sunset. Cameron, Grace, and Lily watched it together. And somehow in that moment, they all felt Jennifer's presence too. Not as a ghost or a source of guilt, but as a blessing. A foundation upon which they'd built something new. And equally precious. The lonely billionaire who'd been searching for just a nanny had found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found his way back to life, to love, and to the understanding that second chances aren't betrayals of the past. They're testaments to the enduring power of the human heart to heal, to grow, and to love again, even after the deepest loss. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all.